Hey folks, it's Ethan here at NHC with Caitlin. Welcome to the Restoring Neighborhoods Task Force meeting for February. We know there are still folks dialing in. Our presenters are online and ready to go, and you will actually get to see their smiling faces in just a few minutes. But bear with us as folks gather.
So that's what they're showing. That's what other people can see right now. Plus us, I think.
Oh, and in case anyone's trying to talk, we do have you in listen-only mode just to make sure the audio works fine for the presentation. You can use the Q&A box in the webinar to ask stuff. We will also do some Q&A at the end, and we'll attempt to unmute for conference call. Just a reminder, when we do that, you want to have yourself muted on your end if you're not talking, and make sure you only have sound coming out of one thing. If you have sound coming out of both your phone and your computer, that's when we get that nasty feedback where we have to mute everybody again. So we will do our darndest to make sure it works, but we want to give the directions up front.
Good. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started here. I've got 2:02 on my time. So thank you to everyone who tuned in, and a special thank you to Kalima and Teddy from Policy Link for agreeing to present on their roadmap that they developed. We're really excited to hear their presentation. So I just want to give them a second to introduce themselves. Guys, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. This is Kalima Rose at Policy Link, and I am the director of the Policy Link Center for Infrastructure Equity, where we focus on the public investments in communities to create greater opportunity, and we have robust programs in housing, transportation, climate justice, and other community infrastructure. And I'm joined by my colleague.
Yes, Teddy Miller here, and I've been at the Center for Infrastructure Equity for a little over a year, and previous to that, dallied as an attorney and also worked in housing, both in Congress and at the National Community Reinvestment Coalition. So coming at this from both a policy perspective and as a real tenant and homeowner now in Oakland, and having navigated these very challenging housing times.
And I would like to introduce you to the painting behind me, which is called Like Flowers. And when we were pulling our hair out here over policy challenges in the housing arena, I try to focus on having thoughts like flowers.
We are excited to welcome all three of you.
Shall we dive right in?
So I have a few policy updates, and then I will hand it over to you guys. So the biggest thing that we're working with right now is probably the President's budget, which is expected to be released sometime next week. We're thinking Monday or Tuesday. So when that comes out, we'll take a deep dive into the housing policy and the housing funding in that. And we also have our annual budget forum that'll be happening on February 18th, so you can get some more information about the President's budget and how that relates to housing.
And that budget forum, like last year, will be a webinar format. So anyone across the country can join and listen for free. We have a great lineup of speakers. We have Laura Hogshead from HUD. We have a panel of folks working at the national, state, and local level. And then we have a special conversation about tax reform and how that connects to the budgetary challenges. So it should be a really good conversation, kicked off by a research presentation on housing landscape, an annual publication from NHC on housing affordability challenges that will lead off the event. So it should be an action-packed couple hours, and I hope you can all join us.
So then, right after the President's budget, we're going to be working with FY17 appropriations, and the House has already started doing some work around them this week, and we'll continue doing that next week. And it's looking like there's going to be some regular order around the housing, around the appropriations process. It's slightly strange because we've just passed FY16 and now we're moving on FY17, but this is the regular timing that is supposed to be happening. So there's a couple things. Tomorrow, actually, the Congressional Budget Office will be holding a full committee, or the House Budget Committee will be holding a full committee hearing on the Congressional Budget Office Economic Outlook. And And then next week there'll also be Members Day, and that's the time for members of Congress to talk about their spending priorities for FY17. And there's a couple other events that are happening, so just be on the lookout for those as we work through the fiscal year 17 appropriations process.
What you're seeing in all of these announcements, especially from the House Budget Committee, is, like Caitlin alluded to, an attempt to reassert regular order in the appropriations process, which means passing separate appropriations bills for each of the subcommittees rather than one big omnibus. The House is making a strong effort. There are some parallel efforts in the Senate, both of which are under Republican control, so in theory they may be cooperating on this, which could lend it some movement. That said, the last few years suggest that regular order is hard to achieve, and this is an election year, so the closer we get to November, the harder everything gets. So stay tuned and see what happens, but for now it does look like they're trying to get to work early.
And so then the last thing on our policy updates agenda, Freddie Mac 2 weeks ago announced their first nonprofit loan transaction of 2016. In the Restoring Neighborhoods email a couple weeks ago, there was the announcement in there if you want some more information, but bids are due on March 8th and February 23rd for the different pools that they have. And if you're interested in more information, you can also check out our January Restoring Neighborhoods Task Force meeting where we had folks from HUD talking about their loan program and how nonprofits can get involved with this.
Right, that was FHA's version of sales of non-performing loans. I will say I've already started to see some news reports, some public statements around non-performing loan sales. I expect there will be more. It's a complicated issue. It has turned out in the wake of the foreclosure crisis that selling distressed loans rather than trying to sell foreclosed real estate has been a better way to get properties back to housing people and as opposed to sitting vacant, which is a positive. It also creates a lot of challenges for community development, especially if profit-motivated entities are not properly incentivized and regulated in their efforts. That if decisions are only made from a profit perspective, sometimes neighborhoods can suffer. A lot of folks are thinking about this from a number of perspectives. It's not clear to me that there is one obvious or right answer for any given pool of loans. It's usually far more nuanced than one sees in a lot of the treatment. So stay tuned. We'll continue to share updates as we see them and invite speakers on the process, but certainly do pay attention to it.
And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Teddy and Kalima.
So you guys are up.
All right.
Okay, great. So thank you, National Housing Conference, for inviting us to share the work that we have been doing here in Oakland, California. The process that we're going to describe to you is an effort to address the incredible displacement challenge that we are facing here in the city of Oakland, in the broader Bay Area, and across California. We just saw recently that 30 of the most expensive housing markets in the nation are in California, and 20 of those 30 are in the Bay Area. So we've had a very unprecedented job boom here in the tech industry with lots of global companies moving here and taking over huge swaths of cities and their workforce, creating pressures. So PolicyLink is a national organization. We were founded in 1999 by Angela Glover Blackwell, and we focus on issues of equity and inclusion by lifting up the solutions that people are developing locally. And we have been very focused on housing throughout our career. And we are most focused on making sure that not only is housing affordable, but that it connects people to opportunity and that the neighborhoods in which people live are getting the robust infrastructure and other kinds of amenities that make them healthy and good places. So in 2013, the city of Oakland came to us and asked us if we could help them develop a set of housing solutions to the displacement process that was occurring in the city. And so they helped us raise money. We got a grant from the National Fair Housing Alliance as part of the foreclosure settlement that happened. And then later the San Francisco Foundation, which is a community foundation here in the Bay Area, also supplemented those funds. And so Urban Strategies Council was tasked to do the data analysis, and we were tasked to help convene stakeholders and to do best practice research based on the kinds of solutions that people thought would help alleviate the problem. So you can see the URL there. It will show you a little bit of the roadmap later, but this is the table of contents. And so really we landed on 3 areas of focus: that we would look at strategies that could prevent displacement and keep people in place, the strategies to build new affordable housing, and then the strategies to improve habitability, because the places that are still affordable in Oakland are crap. So in the, we found as we were going along that several other cities were facing similar kinds of challenges. I will say most of these places have either very strong financial industries or very strong tech industries in them, and having similar housing challenges. So we have other blueprints to borrow from and learn from as well. Just to say a little bit about some of the trends that are going on here that are informing these pressures that we're facing.
Sure. Well, it's an oft-cited statistic that is a policy thing that by 2044, 2043, depending how you project it, we're going to be a majority people of color nation. And California is already at that leading edge as a majority people of color state. And this has pretty important implications as far as who's housed and who isn't. And if going forward, if low-income communities and people of color don't have access to adequate housing, whether it's ownership or rental, that has cascading effects on opportunity for life. Just looking at this piece here, this is a projection of the REMA goals, which is the regional housing needs assessment at state level. And what you can see in those circles, the side of the circles is the amount of housing that each jurisdiction is estimated to need. And within those circles is a number which projects the year that they'll achieve that number. And you can see San Francisco there. I'm not sure if it's too small for you to see, but it's projected to hit its goals in 2039. Oakland is not projected to hit its goals until the 22nd century, until 2173. And even other jurisdictions, Concord, not until the 33rd century, 3217. So all to say that while some jurisdictions are on pace, others are woefully behind, but in no place in the Bay Area and the 9 counties that make up the Bay Area are we meeting the housing needs of the average working family, particularly low-income folks, are being pushed out. Looking closer at Oakland, we have some data mapping here which shows the foreclosure rates along the east and west parts of the city. That yellow spine that you might be able to see in the middle is International Boulevard, which kind of like DC and the H Street light rail is being invested in for transit. It's going to have a bus rapid transit line, about $280 million of the transit investment, and anticipated land values increasing all along the quarter-mile corridor surrounding it, which coincides with where traditionally, historically, the city's African American and people of color communities have lived. Oakland's already demographically changed profoundly from the 1970s when it was a majority African American city. It's now about a quarter African American, a quarter Hispanic, and the rest of Latino, Upper West Asian, and Black. But the African American population is being decimated at a very fast rate, and in another 10, 15 years, it's projected to go into the single digits, which it already has done in San Francisco. So in many ways, the waves of gentrification and demographic change we're experiencing in Oakland have already been foreshadowed in San Francisco, and so the charge here is to how do we take those lessons from what happened across the Bay and avoid that type of change as the hot economy spreads out. This is another data map which maps out the investor-acquired properties, basically taking advantage of the foreclosure crisis that hit Oakland particularly hard, and it's again strongly correlated where you have low-income communities of color. And a lot of these places have been purchased not just by one-time, single people, investors trying to buy a home, but by national corporations that are treating these as securities and have turned the whole single-family housing market in Oakland into a rental market as they've done across cities nationwide. As I mentioned, the African American population has been decreasing pretty dramatically, and this has been true in also our neighboring cities of Richmond, and basically everyone who can't afford to stay in the inner core of the Bay Area has been pushed out to our suburbs. I'm going to go back to it, but you can see this map here. The darker regions are where there's a percentage change increase in people of color. And basically, people are now having to commute 2 hours, 3 hours just to get to their work, which has remained in the work and transit hubs of San Francisco and Oakland.
You can, where the number 13 is, that is where Oakland is.
Yeah. And just back on this piece, last piece I'm going to just touch on right now briefly is the housing cost burden, which, as you know, is measured as any household is paying over 30% of their income dedicated towards housing. It's falling hard on everyone in the Bay Area, but particularly hard on African American and Latino households who are really struggling to maintain their housing. And the fact is, right now, anyone in Oakland, no matter what neighborhood they live in, whether they're renters or homeowners, if they lost their housing, 80% of Oaklanders would not be able to remain in their neighborhood. So it's definitely a problem that has galvanized citizens from every neighborhood, and it's really captured the city's mind right now as well. So with that,
so I just wanted to say a few high-level findings because I think they're emblematic of what it means just for all kinds of institutional partners. So 17% of children declined in the city over the last decade. As you mentioned, a quarter of the African American, 24% decline in African American and Latino. And just overall, because families have left, there's just lower population density. The home ownership rate declined by 25%, which is, just has huge implications. And in the East Bay, which is our side of the bay from San Francisco, it's projected that 143,000 new jobs. And we're seeing both nationwide and here that all the jobs lost in the recession were much higher wage than the jobs that have returned after the recession. So you see this dual pressure of household income being lower and of rents increasing. So what we did was entered into a period of very intense consultation with all kinds of citizens and nonprofit organizations and city council members and people in their districts to find out what people were facing and what we should be focusing on both in our data analysis and in our policy research. And so the kinds of stakeholders included these different city departments that are responsible for housing, and the Housing and Development Department of the City of Oakland runs a housing assistance center, which has long lines at it every day. And then our public health agency is doing a lot of work to try to intervene and help families that are facing displacement challenges. We have lots of legal services organizations, a very active tenant advocacy community. We went to the real estate developers and the Landlords Association, to our nonprofit housing development community, and UC Berkeley has been doing a lot of work here, Federal Reserve, and to different economists in the community. And so this is the kind of dynamic we have going on. The rental housing, most of the people in those census tracts that Teddy was showing you along International Boulevard can afford $900 a month in rent. And currently, 1 to 2 bedroom apartments are going for $2,500 a month. And so you can also see that extremely low income households have extreme rent burdens in the city here. And then you can also see the disparity in household median income and why it is hitting the African American and Latino communities so hard. So I told you that we came up with sort of 3 buckets of policies, and we tried to project how these policies, how many households they would affect. And so in the buckets that we came up with, we were looking at the tenant relocation and protections. We have a big liability in our city of lots of apartment buildings that were built in the 50s and 60s having garages underneath them, soft stories that are seismically very vulnerable to significant earthquakes. And as we saw in our work with people in New Orleans after Katrina, when you take a huge part of the housing stock away after a disaster, it creates really massive displacement problems. So our city council has been working on a seismic retrofit policy, and so we wanted to think about how to couple that with tenant protection as well, so that rents wouldn't go up significantly afterwards. We have, I will show you a map in a second, a lot of 2 to 4 apartments that are not currently part of our common conversion policy that we saw at great risk. And I think that they serve something like 21,000 households. So we added up just in all these ways what the amount could help keep people in place with these kinds of policies. And this 5th one, the converted market rate into long-term affordable. This one has come out of, after the foreclosure crisis, the Ford Foundation and others started investing in some of the big affordable housing producers and managers of property to be buying up some of the foreclosure properties and taking them off market. And so with some experience here, one of the policies that has come forward is helping particular capital pools to let nonprofit housing developers that do property management take our rental housing properties that are under rent control here and off the market to keep them affordable. We have our rent stabilization ordinance here. When a vacancy occurs, it can go back to market. So we're seeing both a lot of tenants who don't know their rights being harassed and pushed out, or just when people move for natural reasons, those things then going to the rent levels that we were telling you about. So this map shows where all those 2 to 4 unit households are, And so you can see a lot of them are in the same territory where all the foreclosures happen, and the majority of people of color are. In our new housing reduction strategies, we are moving forward to a housing bond in the county election and a infrastructure bond at the city level that will also contribute to that, both the market and other new construction activities. We're moving forward right now with an impact fee and a alternative inclusionary policy, doing lands policy to dedicate our public lands for housing, either through selling them and putting fees into our housing trust fund or dedicating them to affordable housing. Similarly, we have a lot of vacant lands in the city of Oakland that have all kinds of liens of moving those into affordable production. And already since the adoption of the roadmap, we have passed the second unit policy, allowing access to units in the city in a much more regular way than previously. So, and then the final one is on the habitability strategies. So right now, only when a tenant complains does the city go out and do an inspection. So the proactive rental inspection policy is moving forward. A small-scale rental housing fund, and then with anti-displacement terms around when those upgrades happen. So you can see this is sort of the whole bucket. And so we put them in phases so that the city council could consider and adopt things as soon as possible, but in a manner that made sense for one to follow the other. And we assigned them to the leadership of who would need to develop the actual policy language or who would be responsible for administering it. So I'll say that we finished the housing roadmap just before mayoral elections, and it was originally commissioned under Mayor Jean Quan, and we decided she wanted to use it really as a platform for her election campaign, but 3 or 4 city council members jumped into the race, and we thought that it would be impolitic to have it come out right before the election because it would be so identified with her campaign that if she lost, it would die. And so we held back the roadmap until after the election, and in fact, we did elect one of our city councilors, Libby Schaff, to be our current mayor. And so the roadmap came out under a cover letter from her and our CEO, Angela Blackwell, just after the election, and we then began the work of really educating the city council deeply, one by one, on what the findings of the roadmap were and the recommendations. And this was also a process of then finding city council members whose districts were particularly affected by one of the strategies that the roadmap was meant to address, and helping them become a champion for carrying that policy forward. And so then I'll let Teddy tell you some of politically what happened next.
Sure. So I mean, throughout this transition from one mayoral administration to another, the housing crisis was continuing and escalating unabated, and people were being pushed out and losing their housing. And as I mentioned, everyone in Oakland has a sense that if their housing situation gets destabilized, they have to leave. So there was a real feeling of desperation, I think, throughout the public. And this came to a head in May this year as basically, Colleen was mentioning that Oakland needs to develop a public lands policy because really there's nothing statutorily standing right now. And this played out with the sale of a particular parcel at the southern end of Lake Merritt, which is kind of the centerpiece public park for the city of Oakland. And what happened is a proposed kind of under, not really scrutinized and not really competitively bidded luxury tower, 24 stories with no affordability. And this was being built on public land. It wasn't a completely private sale. And this was on its way to being passed, but the housing advocacy groups seized on this as a sign of how backwards the priorities were and how the market was really running roughshod over longtime Oakland residents. So at the city council meeting when it was due to be approved, they chained themselves to the dais of the city council and shut it down. And this led to at least enough time where a member who hasn't been identified of this, the attorney's office, could leak a memo indicating that the proposed sale violated a state law prohibiting how it went down. And so now we have not only this parcel of land being revisited, and I think there's 5 different bidders, all of whom are including affordability, but it set the stage for, I think, every member of the city council to understand that housing affordability is something that affects every neighborhood, and it's something that requires urgent attention right now.
So this was a good setting for moving the roadmap forward. And so our council chair, who you can see up there in the white jacket underneath the screen, who heads our neighborhood housing services in Oakland, called a special council meeting to hear the recommendations of the roadmap and to hear from residents. And so this turned into like a 4-hour council meeting. And the woman and her 2 daughters on the right were the most heartbreaking story of the night, talking about the fact that they were being evicted from their apartment, and so they couldn't find anything else in Oakland, and their kids were going to have to change schools. And they are members of Causa Justa, which is one of our most robust tenants' rights organizations here in the Bay Area, and they are a member nationally of the network Right to the City, and they have been putting forward a lot of the proposals. So at the end of this 4-hour meeting, this is way into the meeting, these pictures, before all the balconies were full, but because lots of people were there with their children, as it got to the midnight hour, the balconies emptied. But the council then unanimously adopted the roadmap. So after that, the mayor, who is standing on that chair, Mayor Libby Schaaf, is taking a picture of the Housing Implementation Cabinet last week voting to adopt the recommendations that the Implementation Cabinet has gone forward to do. And so basically they set up subcommittees to take on each of the adopted policies in the framework and to put the stakeholders and experts that could flesh out the policy language around them. And so everybody was doing thumbs up to the recommendations. And so this chart developed through much more nuanced scrutiny in which policies, what the financing mechanisms would be, what the enforcement and monitoring mechanisms would be, and how they could work on both the ownership, rental, and new construction side of things. And so this graphic was actually borrowed from Seattle's housing livability report of looking at, within city neighborhoods, how do the different policies work together to as a complex, complement each other and work to solve the crisis. And so it brings both the rent protections, the ownership, contribution by developers, and new construction. So like everywhere else in the country that's facing these issues, some of the solutions that we would have liked to put forward have need legislative fixes at the state level. And so I'm just going to let Teddy, at a high level tell you what some of those things are. And that we are working here in the state of California to try to create synergy between cities that are all facing these constraints to do something at the state legislative level. And our state legislators, we have a very robust Latino caucus in California because Latinos are our biggest population, fastest growing, and who have been asking us for housing solutions at the state level. And so we are going to be putting forward a housing policy agenda at our state level this year as well.
Right. I'll just briefly cover, there's essentially 3 levels of government that can affect housing. As Colleen just described, the city housing plan is a plan to get, it's ambitious, but to get 34,000 homes either preserved or produced. But that is not even up to the scale of needs, our regional housing needs allocation, which is 58,000 in the next 10 years. So we have to look at larger jurisdictions and acknowledging that the federal housing supports are not going to change for at least another 6 years. It looks like, and California at the state level seems to be our best policy option in this state to advancing, policies to address the housing crisis. So some of these include restoring inclusionary zoning, which took a hit after the Palmer decision recently, which basically prohibited, I think it was ownership homes from, rental homes from including.
It's contradicted our state Costa-Hawkins law, which doesn't allow rent protections on any buildings built after 1983. So because the rental housing coming out of our inclusionary policies does restrict rent, the developer sued and the court found in their favor. So we need a legislative fix to that, even though localities have figured out workarounds, but we need just more direct ways to recapture it in our rental housing.
The developer Palmer was the slimy owner of the LA Clippers, who was in the news for his incendiary, racially insensitive remarks. At least he's left a bad legacy on many fronts. So, as Kalima mentioned, also we have Costa-Hawkins in California, which basically every year, creates a worsening situation as far as units that are under rent control, as the older units either come off market or succumb to destruction. We also have Prop 13 in California, which has always been the third rail politically, but is a huge obstacle towards creating a symmetric market between new homeowners and old homeowners. And right now, it's extremely challenging to become a new homeowner in California. And the state coffers themselves have been extremely depleted for the past 40 years since Prop 13 was introduced. Permanently dedicating land to affordable housing, that can take place at a city, county, and state level. We do have some housing bonds that are taking place at different levels, and we have a $312 million bond that just was approved in San Francisco recently, but we need much larger investments to meet the scale of the challenge. When we have our cap and trade system that's here in California, about $400 million was raised last year, and that's projected to raise about $12 billion between now and 2020, and fully 25% of that is meant to be invested in marginalized communities and disinvested communities. And we are advocating that all infrastructure investments be paired with robust anti-displacement measures, so that as urban areas receive, trains and investments in roads and public resources, that be paired with renter protections and enforcement mechanisms to make sure that long-time residents aren't displaced.
I want to say something here. So in California, we have mandatory greenhouse gas reduction goals. And so we instituted this cap and trade program as a tax on polluters, and that's what's generating the funds. And it has provisions to both invest 25% of the funds in communities that have the worst environmental emission exposures, and another 25% of it has to be invested in affordable housing. And President Obama has implemented a clean energy plan requirements across all 50 states now. And so their clean energy plans have to do similar, looking at ways that they can reduce toxic emissions. And so this is an opportunity that you all could think about in your states of getting similar provisions on a carbon tax in your state to dedicate to transit-oriented development and to affordability.
We'll describe a few more of the state policies. Prohibiting discrimination, so you can't deny rent to a potential tenant simply because they have Section 8 vouchers. So having a statute protecting that status. Addressing the needs of those who have the most challenging times finding housing, particularly in communities of opportunity. That's the formerly incarcerated. So we have, we suggest that we do a ban the box for housing authorities statewide, so that they're not able to prevent formerly incarcerated from having a stable platform from which to reenter society. And we also think that there's some, models that we could learn from both internationally and nationally about cooperative land ownership.
So I'm just going to go back to this idea of the naturally occurring affordable housing, which is sort of in the upper right-hand corner, because it has evolved since we developed the roadmap. And I think it's an interesting strategy because of, so we have 17,000 voucher holders in Oakland, a large number of whom occupy some of that single-family rental housing that we showed you. And as rents have gone up in Oakland, voucher holders are having a more and more difficult time being able to find any landlords who will accept their vouchers, and there's many landlords who are trying to get out of using vouchers any longer. And we have an old apartment building stock which has rent stabilization on it, but can go to market when anyone leaves. And it has a lot of maintenance challenges and code violations that have serious health impacts of both lead and mold problems. So what the naturally occurring affordable housing is put together a $5 million fund that includes bank investment from CRA funds and other investments by entities like Enterprise Community Partners and others. And that fund is going to go and try to buy up 2,000 units over the next 5 years. And the county bond that we're trying to get passed is going to do invest in rehab of that housing. And the city council is going to enter into MOUs with the developers to get the housing to keep it permanently affordable to 80% of area median income and below. And they are going to rebate to the developers the real estate transfer tax so that they can use that also for operating capital or rehab capital, operating subsidy or rehab capital. And then finally, they are going to work with the housing authority to make, when units become open, to allow Section 8 voucher holders to access those units so that the housing authority can fully utilize its vouchers, and so that the operator of the permanently affordable housing will actually have fair market rent for some of the apartments in that building, even as they're keeping it affordable for people below that. So I just want to say that
You still hear us?
Can you still hear us?
Yes,
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Okay, we have
Says
something
about
weird
screen
going
sharing,
on, but so I just want to say, this is our last slide, that we really have to prioritize, we really have to keep a focus on racial equity as we are thinking about the implementation of these new strategies, because we know that if there is not a focus on the people who have been displaced, that it won't happen. And so we are working on policy development that will allow a local preference for the some portion of the new housing that gets developed, or for people who are currently being displaced being able to move to the front of the voucher line, or any inclusionary or other available housing. And that we're focused on doing very affirmative outreach and marketing to the African American community, because they're still facing a lot of grandmas who are getting, cash offers for their houses without really knowing the value of those properties and seeing them flipped, or helping them think about passing their properties on to their children or grandchildren, and having financing mechanisms in place that will allow them to do that. So we think that together adds up to an equity focus, and we at PolicyLink like to say that equity is a superior growth model, because we know when people are stably housed in healthy housing, that it allows them to utilize their hard-earned income on other aspects of healthy development, and to access the key amenities of the region that allow them to grow their families into strong, economic, well-educated participants in society. So Teddy and I are happy to be a resource to anybody that wants to think about doing one of these in your own communities. And I just want to point you to the PolicyLink Equity Atlas, National Equity Atlas, which brings together all kinds of data, like the data that was produced with Roadmap, but that can be downloaded for your own city and your own region, metropolitan region. It brings data together for the 150 largest metropolitan regions and for the 100 largest cities in the country. And those two things together, the data we did at a local level in the roadmap, the Urban Strategies Council did through their open data platforms, and our National Equity Atlas can really help you do a demographic change and housing equity roadmap in your own place. So with that, I will turn it back over to you, NHC.
So, Kalima and Teddy, first off, thank you. This was really interesting. It was everything I had hoped for. I have a couple of questions. I know Caitlin has some too, and then we will open up the line. One thing occurred to me as I was hearing you talk, especially about the efforts in Oakland at the local level to implement, and you get this roadmap passed and to implement it, is you've linked together a lot of different policy pieces. And I can see real advantage to that because they interrelate, right? You're using public land, you're doing inclusionary requirements on new housing, there's rental protections, there's foreclosure interventions, all sorts of stuff linked together. Can you talk some from the political side about whether it made it harder or easier to accomplish elements of the roadmap by having pieces linked together and presented in this collective way? I mean, in other realms we hear, well, a one-off that is acceptable to a lot of folks can be an easier thing to get passed. Sometimes when you build a larger collection of policy initiatives, it's a way to get buy-in from many entities. How did you see it play out in Oakland?
Well, we're not at the end game yet. So different city council members, as I said, have taken up leadership. the city of Oakland itself, has commissioned both the impact fee study and is doing an audit of its rent stabilization ordinance and its implementation. Enterprise Community Partners did a deeper look at other jurisdictions that have rent stabilization ordinances that seem to be working better than ours in California by their administration and the kind of education they do of tenants. So we haven't had the vote yet on tenant protections, and I think that's going to be a fight here. The impact fees and inclusionary, because we have a regional housing market and a lot of developers work in jurisdictions that have impact fees and inclusionary, Oakland's kind of behind the game on that. And because like that luxury development that Teddy showed you, that tenant advocates shut the city down around, developers are saying, tell us what the rules are. We want to contribute affordability. We don't want to be shut down. And so I think some of these things there's better political appetite for. We have a much stronger tenant advocacy community than we have a landlord advocacy community. So the landlords will complain when those new policy ideas come forward, but there's more political will. We're a city that's 58% renters, so there's more voters in that bucket. So what the mayor has been trying to say is don't take pot shots at each other, don't leverage one policy against the other, we need the whole package. And so, at the time that we come to the actual, so we had a unanimous vote on the framework, but we have not yet had to do the hard work of either. In California, for a bond, you have to get 66%, a 2/3 vote.
Yeah.
So, these things are going to, but San Francisco just won its with 72% of the vote. So, let's see what happens here in Alameda County.
The other way, how I characterize the politics of Oakland, it's actually kind of similar to DC's local politics, and just it's overwhelmingly Democratic and progressive, but there's still kind of internal variations. And when it comes to housing policy, it's basically kind of aligned with the flats versus the hills, and the hills kind of mimicking or actually creating the same type of exclusionary policies of, no multifamily dwellings and certainly no affordable housing in these neighborhoods. And, one of our main transit station neighborhoods actually downzoned itself when BART was introduced into Rockridge was this neighborhood. And so I think you see those dynamics played out a little bit in the city council, but there's overwhelming consensus, as the city council demonstrated when they unanimously adopted the equity roadmap, that this is a problem that needs to be addressed now. Oakland also just faces significant, public financing challenges since the loss of a lot of its funding. Jerry Brown, who used to be the mayor of Oakland, took away the development funds, which was just where
he's now our governor.
Yeah, where they got most of the money for affordable housing. So with the loss of all the staff that came with that loss of funding, there's just not as much tools and resources available to address these, pressing challenges, which are getting worse by the day.
So we still need federal policy reform too, which we're going to work with you on.
No question, and I think you're right, and I was glad that you connected it to the state level and to the Clean Power Plan that we've been working on with a lot of other folks at Enterprise and the Green Building Council and NRDC and ACEEE, a whole bunch of folks. I would say we haven't talked about it a lot in the Restoring Neighborhoods Task Force, but our Green Affordable Housing Coalition has been doing a lot there. We've had a couple of webinars. There will be more coming up. There's one from HUD still coming up, right? It hasn't passed?
No, it passes in the middle of January.
Middle of January, okay. Because a lot of the action there is at the state level. As each state chooses its own response to the federal obligation to reduce greenhouse gases, one of the ways they can do that is by spending resources, spending money on making housing more energy efficient, especially multifamily buildings. It's a very cost-effective way to do it. So states have this option of they're going to have to spend money anyway. Spending it on affordable housing actually gets them a lot of bang for their buck in terms of meeting their carbon emission goals. It also has, big benefits for communities, for families, on the health side, on the, the household budget side, all sorts of stuff like that. So we've been producing some materials to help folks advocate at the state level and understand, what seems complex in a pretty accessible way. And I'm hopeful for more work to come as each of the states finds its own path forward through this.
Just another connection I will make also is the new affirmatively furthering fair housing rule that HUD has come out with, and which jurisdictions are going to be complying over the next 5 years. That the equity roadmap is a good blueprint for thinking about how you go from analyzing data to setting housing goals and then turning them into policies that can help you, meet your goals. So you can think more expansively than just doing the assessment to direct your HUD dollars to thinking about a more comprehensive housing policy strategy and infrastructure spending policy as well.
I think that's a really good point. You anticipated something I was going to ask you about, because I think this does fit into the fair housing landscape, and it's a good reminder that localities have a lot of tools available to them, and I really like how the roadmap starts to connect those pieces together. But I keep asking questions, and I suspect others may have them. Caitlin, if you have any, you should go ahead, and you can also, whenever you're ready, open up the line for folks.
Yeah, and I encourage people to type their questions, or you can use the raise your hand feature, and I can unmute you. But I'm curious to hear from the two of you what advice you would give to communities who are thinking about starting something like this, but don't know where to get started.
Well, we were lucky. The co-author of this report with me was Margaretta Lynn, who was heading, she was had a special housing specialist appointment with the city, and she was very equity focused and innovative in trying to work through city departments to, move a dialogue there. 3 different departments in the city of Oakland, and then the Housing Authority have roles in housing that are from planning and permitting to housing and community development and code enforcement. And so I think finding the right city official who has the fire and mission and drive to address these was critical. And then having support from philanthropy to bring the right data providers together so that we could do a very deep dive. And I'm going to, when I'm done answering the question, I'm going to just take you on a little tour of the kinds of data that we use for our analysis. And the other thing we used our philanthropic support from was really taking the time to convene stakeholders. And so working across that really diverse group of stakeholders, I think if I was going to, because this report straddled 2 administrations and some people on the inside changed, the housing implementation cabinet that came out afterwards, having established something like that from the beginning would have been good. To sort of have the stakeholders that could have spanned 2 administrations. We lost time having to educate a whole new set of stakeholders under the mayor's housing cabinet. So I think that building public will across the stakeholder groups so that you could understand where there was shared support for policies or where there was going to have to be negotiated settlements was a good process. And Yeah, so, and the thing about Urban Strategies Council, most cities have these that they're overall associated with the Urban Institute, and there's sort of a city-based nonprofit open data provider who have negotiated deals with the city for making data open and accessible for accountability and better effective partnerships and governing. So Urban Strategies Council has that kind of relationship with the City of Oakland. They're fantastic local data providers. So finding either a university, your local data provider, the Federal Reserve, somebody who can help you at that level. And so I'll show you the kinds of data, right? So this is like we looked at population change, and all these are by block group. And then we decided that we would do looks at very different, at the top 10 neighborhoods to see what was going on there. And we would look at demographic change data, and we would, so this is the selected neighborhoods that we decided to take deeper dives in. They represent different demographics. And so we did things, you know, we looked at age change. We have, you know, just like the rest of America, aging population. So you can see in a lot of our communities, you know, single people living in 4-bedroom houses. There should be some housing solution in that. You know, we looked at the change in race, and so you can see that this significant decline in African Americans. We've lost 35,000 people over the last 10 years. So you can just see that this was like, I think it's 40 pages of data that we mapped. And so this really formed the basis of doing data-driven decision-making in our housing policy development. And this, like this page is showing the affordability level of what people can afford by paying a third of their income and what rents or sale costs are going for. And so this is where we saw that there's nobody who gets displaced from a neighborhood in Oakland now. The median income of people from that current neighborhood and what the current costs are, people couldn't afford it. I mean, that's just so shocking and alarming. So I'll stop on the data front, but take any more questions people have.
Well, while Caitlin's checking to see if folks have digitally raised their hand, let me follow up on the sort of using data to drive the decision-making point you raised. When you're communicating, whether it's with city council members or civic leaders, you know, folks who are in the decision-making, can you give me an example of what you'd call an eye-opener, right? A piece of data, a way of presenting, a way of describing it that reached someone and change their understanding of the housing challenge by virtue of the data, as opposed to, hey, it's a liberal town, it's going through, you know, severe economic dislocation and rapid demographic change, and folks sort of know that at a gut level, even if they haven't measured it. Were there things that you found with the data or described with the data presentations that caused people to say, wow, I didn't realize that it changes how I think about housing? I know that may be a hard question, but I'm looking at all of this great work you did, and I'm trying to think about what created an entry point.
I think, you know, when newspaper journalists have looked at this, I think they've highlighted the dramatic drop in African American population, not only in Oakland but in Richmond, two kind of classically majority African American cities, and that's kind of been the attention-grabbing headline that's accompanied it.
And the families with children, and those two maps that we showed of where the foreclosure crisis hit and where investors have bought up things. I think that's been really shocking to people. And then I think just like people want to do something. Like, you know, Oakland is kind of like Harlem or something for the Bay Area. It's just considered like the culture of the city is so identified with the vibrancy of the African American community. And to think about losing that is just like, you know, we don't want that to happen. So, and I'll say in the Housing Implementation Cabinet, another policy that they have taken up that wasn't one of our original recommendations is a focus on artist housing and workspace to make sure that the vibrant arts community can stay here. And like it just got announced 2 months ago that Uber was taking over a shuttered department building in downtown Oakland and moving its headquarters here with 3,000 new employees. And so the mayor, you know, is talking to the executives about contributing both the development of housing and to our housing trust fund to, you know, help advance our goals and have employers be part of it. And I think that that is going to be a much more robust at our Metropolitan Planning Organization, MTC, to really think, you know, like Google had a proposal for a housing campus in Cupertino around their facility, and their expansion of their jobs and commercial facility was approved, but their housing campus was denied by the city council. And so this is really a regional problem here that we need the employers themselves to be contributing to part of the solution of. And, you know, concern isn't necessarily the lowest income households, but there's just so much downward pressure on the housing market by higher income people taking over lower cost places because they can't find anything at their, you know, just open and available. So
I just another policy. Oh, go ahead. That one policy that's spilling out of basically the housing crisis is to have at a different jurisdictional level, both citywide, we've declared in Oakland a state of housing emergency, but to have it declared at a state level, and for that to trigger certain actions related to maybe CEQA analysis, which is our environmental quality review, or perhaps the zoning requirements in different neighborhoods, so that you get different levels of density in neighborhoods or jurisdictions that are identified as going through a housing crisis based on the criteria that's so clear to see.
You know, another interesting thing to this audience might be, one of the things the Silicon Valley Community Foundation has been pursuing is funding impact fee studies in every county of the Bay Area. We're a 9-county region. And so that any commercial expansion would trigger fees that would then have a nexus to housing production. And so thinking about, and when we did our fair housing and equity assessment here as part of our Sustainable Communities grant, and that those assessments were the pilot really for the fair housing rule that has since come out. One of the things that our Association of Bay Area Governments did was they did an inventory of the housing policies in every jurisdiction in our 9 counties. They're really uneven. And so I would say San Francisco has the most robust, and then probably after that Berkeley. But so trying to really look at the places where there's levers to create a nexus between job growth and housing affordability is another strategy that we see advancing here in the Bay Area.
And I think that's important for a number of reasons. I mean, certainly impact fees farther north on the West Coast are coming into play. And it is a really natural connection between the increased economic activity and the benefits of job growth, but recognizing the externality of the change in the housing market that occurs. I'm hopeful, guardedly so, but hopeful that it's a way to engage employers directly and constructively in housing affordability challenges that some past attempts at the national level around whether you're doing employer-assisted housing or trying to get employers to actively get involved in affordable housing policy from the perspective that you need to house your workers and it's part of the vibrant community, haven't gotten a lot of traction. That employers, when they focus on housing their workers, focus on housing their workers, and it's either a campus approach or a employer-owned housing or direct assistance. It's very narrowly targeted, not unreasonably so, but that's how it's played out. But I feel like the impact fee is a way to generalize the connection and bring more community benefit apart from just singular benefits to the workers and the employers, in a particular industry, in a particular place. So it's one of the issues that we're watching very closely and are pleased to see some good progress on.
I'll say another thing that we really was advancing in real time while we were working on the roadmap, and that I would include now as a recommendation to anyone doing another policy, would really need to look into the role of Airbnb in your community and how that's affecting the housing market. And we were talking last night, Teddy and I presented with some other housing leaders here at an urban planning class at UC Berkeley, and we were talking afterwards about this sort of interplay between these real estate investment trusts just buying up huge amounts of property and running it for profit in ways that we haven't seen before, including single-family dwellings, and people who are evicting tenants, and then like under state law, you can't evict a tenant from a rent-controlled apartment unless the owner is going to occupy the apartment, or you're going out of business of renting. And so those are called Ellis Act evictions. And so in San Francisco, it's just like the whole map is covered in red dots, red fires of Ellis Act evictions. And there's a sense that a lot of that's getting churned into Airbnb. And so we were saying, these are the kinds of levers you could just say if you evict a tenant from a rent-stabilized apartment, you can never Airbnb it, or you can't for 10 years. And if somebody is buying up buildings, evicting tenants, saying they're not going to do rental business, then flipping the building for double the price, let's attach a real estate transfer tax that discourages that kind of behavior. So there's still more tools in the toolbox that are on the table that have to do with just the way capital is organizing itself in different ways than we have witnessed before, that we're still trying to wrap our arms around.
Well, I think that's right, and you highlight sort of different places along a continuum where outright bans on particular kinds of activity are at one end versus taxes or fees attached to the activity that offset the external cost, right? The negative that comes with the economic activity that can be very hard to just sort of dam up like a river. And we have seen it in different ways in different places. Certainly the history of rent control in high demand rental markets is checkered with all sorts of different attempts, steps forward, steps back, and all sorts of responses from property owners and holders of capital and renters that are natural and, in retrospect, perhaps foreseeable reactions to rent control that remind us around trying to sort of work with the flows of capital in ways to direct it into productive use rather than just sort of stop it in its tracks, because that rarely works. It flows somewhere else, and not always in a good way. I think Airbnb is a great example of that, right? This opening is created to take real estate and turn it into, instead of long-term residential, short-term hospitality type use outside the regulations that we normally think of for the hospitality sector, and it's created the opening of capitals rushing in all sorts of ways, and we gotta make sure it's done responsibly and make sure we mitigate and offset all the impact on the residential sector, and we're only just starting to figure that out. Most people are only just seeing the issue, and policy has been slow to respond thus far. So there's a lot more to talk about. I am not seeing any further questions on the chat log, so I think what we're probably going to do is wrap up. I'll sort of pause here and make sure no one else pops a hand up. This has been, for me, a fascinating conversation, and I hope others have taken as much from it as I have. I want to thank both Teddy and Kalima for spending more than a good hour with us. We really appreciate you guys taking the time.
Okay, well, thanks for inviting us, and we look forward to any feedback you have.
Excellent. There will be more to come. Thank you both. And thanks everyone for signing on to the webinar. We will send the presentation slides and the link to the roadmap around to everyone in the notes from the call, and look for more next month.